The sound of crystal shattering on the marble floor was not as loud as the scream that followed. But for Elena, that noise marked the end of an era of silence. She held only a cleaning cloth, her hands trembling, and her gaze fixed on the shards that gleamed under the light of the opulent chandelier. In front of her, Viviane did not look like a businesswoman or a respected philanthropist. She looked like someone consumed by a kind of fury that money cannot hide. "You're fired. Now, get out of my house before I call the police and say you try to rob me." Viviane's voice cut through the air, loaded with a contempt that went far beyond a simple broken glass. Elena did not cry. The exhaustion was so great that her tears seemed to have dried up months ago. She simply searched that woman's gaze and saw something most people ignored, a visceral fear hidden behind arrogance. Elena knew that the reason for that dismissal was not the crystals on the floor, but the blue folder she had found by chance beneath the lining of the library cabinet the morning before. A folder that contained the names of children who had never received the scholarships promised by the Open Heart Foundation. While Viviane continued her verbal attack, pointing her finger with impeccably done nails, the silence at the top of the stairs was absolute. Ricardo, a man who built his empire on the pillar of trust and who was rarely seen without a tailored suit, watched everything from the shadows of the upper corridor. He was not just Viviane's husband. He was the man who, for years, believed his wife was the right arm of ethics in his life. Seeing the woman he loved humiliating an employee who had been with the family for 6 years, a woman who took care of his sick mother until her last breath, was as if a veil had been torn from his eyes. The tension in the room was suffocating. Elena finally spoke, her voice low, but so firm that it made Viviane step back out of pure instinct. "You can take me out of here, Mrs. Viviane. You can take my job, my uniform, and even the little dignity you think I have. But you cannot erase the numbers I saw in that folder. Those families trust the foundation. Do you sleep at night knowing that the future of those children is funding your jewelry collection?" Viviane's face turned pale instantly. The anger gave way to an icy panic. She looked around desperately, checking if the doors were closed, not noticing that the real danger was already listening to everything from upstairs. The first mystery hanging in the air was, why would a woman with access to immeasurable personal wealth risk everything for embezzlement in a charitable foundation? There was something deeper that Elena still did not understand, a debt or a secret that required sums of money that not even the millionaire Ricardo should notice. Elena walked toward the service door, but stopped when she felt the weight of an envelope in the pocket of her apron. She would not hand it over there. Not to Viviane. She needed an ally, but she did not know whether Ricardo was part of the problem or just another victim of his wife's lies. Ricardo, in turn, felt a tightness in his chest that he had never experienced in any high-risk stock market negotiation. He saw Elena leave under the light rain that was beginning to fall, without an umbrella, without a word of goodbye, carrying only a cloth bag with her belongings. He saw his wife sit on the expensive sofa and breathe in relief, letting out a nervous laugh while picking up the phone to call someone and say, "The problem has been solved. The nosy maid is out on the street." Ricardo knew that his life, as he knew it, had ended at that exact second. Viviane's betrayal was not only marital. It was a betrayal of every value he tried to imprint on his surname. He withdrew to the office in silence, his steps muffled by the thick carpet, while his mind worked at a furious pace. He would not confront Viviane now. He needed proof. He needed to understand why Elena, a woman who barely had enough to pay her younger sister's rent, did not accept silence as a bargaining chip. The conflict was only beginning, and the lines between who was the master and who was the servant were about to blur in a way that no one in that mansion could foresee. If you are enjoying this story and want to know how this search for justice will end, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Take the opportunity and tell us down below in the comments what you thought of Elena's attitude and from which city or country you are watching us right now. Elena's departure left a strange void in the mansion. Where there had once been the soft sound of her organization and silent care, now there remained only the echo of Viviane's bitter words. Ricardo, locked in his office, could not get the image of that blue folder mentioned by the employee out of his mind. He knew his wife as a sophisticated woman, but the expression he saw on her face when Elena spoke about the embezzlement was something he had never seen in 20 years of marriage. It was the expression of a cornered animal. He began to sift through his own memories, connecting dots that had once seemed irrelevant. Sudden trips, jewelry he did not remember buying, and phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room. The first mystery Ricardo needed to solve was why the Foundation's auditing system, which he himself had helped create, had never detected a single scent of irregularity. Meanwhile, Viviane acted with a disturbing calm that bordered on psychopathy. She did not seem to feel remorse. In her mind, Elena was just a disposable obstacle. What Ricardo did not know was that Viviane was not acting alone. She had turned philanthropy into a private marketplace, where political favors were exchanged for tax exemptions and shell companies that existed only on paper. At the center of this scheme was the Valenka Institute, the heart of Ricardo's family legacy. Viviane sat at the dining table, pouring herself an expensive wine, and began typing a message. "We have a leak. The maid saw the Luxembourg account files. I've already taken care of her, but we need to make sure no one believes her if she opens her mouth." That sentence revealed the depth of the abyss. Viviane was not just stealing. She was involved in something that crossed borders, something that could destroy Ricardo's empire in a matter of hours. Elena, on the other hand, walked through the outskirts of the city under the gray sky. She lived in a small house with her younger sister, Lucia, who suffered from a chronic lung condition and depended on expensive medication. The dismissal was not just the loss of a job. It was the end of her family's security. However, Elena was not a passive victim. While working in the mansion, she learned to read people and the environment. She knew that Viviane would try to discredit her. What the antagonist did not expect was that Elena was not just an observer. For years, she had seen how power was used to silence the powerless, and she decided that, this time, silence would not be her response. She sat at the table in her simple kitchen and opened an old notebook. There, she had written down, day after day, the dates of Viviane's secret meetings and the license plates of the cars that frequented the mansion when Ricardo was on business trips. Viviane's cruelty reached a new level that night. She knew that firing Elena was not enough. It was necessary to annihilate her so that her voice would never carry any weight. She activated a contact at the local police station, a man whose gambling debts had been paid with money from the Foundation. Within hours, a patrol car was at Elena's door. The accusation was aggravated theft. A limited edition gold watch had supposedly disappeared from Viviane's bedroom on the same day as the dismissal. The moment of intense emotion came when the officers searched the small house, knocking over Lucia's books and rummaging through the sisters' few belongings. Elena saw the fear in her sister's eyes and felt a rage that burned like fire in her veins. She was handcuffed in front of the neighbors, publicly humiliated for a crime she did not commit, while Viviane, on the other side of the city, toasted to her own efficiency. Ricardo, monitoring the internal security cameras and tracking his wife's communications, saw the moment Viviane made the false report. He felt a deep nausea. The man who believed he had everything under control realized that he had been sleeping beside a stranger capable of destroying lives out of pure selfishness. But he needed to be cautious. If he confronted Viviane now, she would destroy the digital evidence, and he would never be able to save the Foundation's reputation or get Elena out of prison. He needed to play her game. He left the office and found Viviane in the living room, pretending a rehearsed sadness. "Ricardo, dear, you won't believe it. That girl, Elena, she stole my favorite watch. I had to call the police. I feel so bad. I know you like her work," she said, with a velvety voice that now sounded to him like the slithering of a snake. At that moment, the first major twist occurs. Ricardo, instead of showing suspicion, embraced his wife and said, "You did the right thing, my love. Honesty is all we have. I'll ask our lawyers to follow the case and make sure she pays for it." Viviane smiled, feeling victorious and secure. What she did not realize was that Ricardo, in that embrace, managed to grab her phone for a few seconds, enough time for a mirroring software he had installed on his office computer to begin copying all the encrypted messages from that night. The passive businessman was gone. In his place emerged a man willing to burn his own world to restore the truth. The parallel investigation was officially underway, and the duel of intelligence between the betrayed husband and the corrupt wife would determine the fate of everyone involved. The conflict escalated rapidly. While Elena spent her first night in a cold cell, worried about her sister's health, she remembered her father's words. Truth is like water. It always finds a crack to escape, no matter how strong the wall is. She closed her eyes and began to mentally reconstruct every document she had seen in the blue folder. She knew there was a second account, one that was not in the physical files. The second mystery emerged. Who was Dr. L, the recipient of nearly half of the Foundation's monthly embezzled funds? The answer to that question was the final piece of the puzzle that could bring down not only Viviane, but the entire system of corruption that sustained the high society of that region. The battle was no longer about a lost job, but about the soul of an institution and the freedom of an innocent woman. The silence in the mansion was now a weapon. Ricardo acted with the precision of a surgeon, maintaining the facade of an understanding husband, while every fiber of his being repudiated Viviane's presence. He knew that time was his greatest enemy. In the office, he immersed himself in the mirror data from her phone, tracking the digital footprints his wife believed had been erased. The name Dr. L appeared with alarming frequency, always linked to transfers made minutes after the receipt of international donations. The third mystery of the plot began to unfold. The transfers were not just embezzlement. They were blackmail payments. Ricardo discovered that Viviane's past, before marrying him, hid a fraudulent bankruptcy in another country, and this Dr. L was the only one who possessed the original records. Viviane was cannibalizing the Foundation not only out of greed, but to keep her social status intact and her past buried. Meanwhile, in the police cell, Elena faced her darkest hour. The lawyer sent by Viviane, pretending to be a public defender, sat in front of her with a proposal that reeked of poison. Confess to the theft of the watch. Sign this document saying you invented the slander about the Foundation, and I guarantee you'll leave here today with a suspended sentence. If you don't sign, your sister, who is alone and sick, will be taken to a state shelter until the trial. The moment of intense emotion hit Elena like a punch to the stomach. The mention of Lucia was the weak point Viviane had hoped to use to break her. Elena looked at the paper, the pen weighing like lead in her hand. She thought about her sister's face, about the air missing from her lungs without the medication. But then she remembered the look of hope on the faces of the mothers who knocked on the Foundation's gate seeking help and returned empty-handed. With a slow and definitive gesture, Elena tore the confession document in front of the lawyer. "Tell her that my silence is not for sale, neither for my freedom nor for my life," she said, with a calm that disarmed the man in the suit. She knew that, by doing that, she was declaring total war. However, what Elena did not know was that Ricardo had already sent, anonymously, a nurse he fully trusted to her house to take care of Lucia and ensure that the medication would not run out. He was acting as an invisible guardian, protecting the only person who had the courage to be honest in his world of lies. Ricardo realized that Elena's integrity was the mirror he needed to see how absent he had been all those years, hidden behind financial statements and board meetings. Ricardo's secret preparation advanced to the operational phase. He would not use his usual lawyers, as he feared they might be under Viviane's influence. Instead, he contacted a retired forensic investigator, a man who owed him his life. Together, they began mapping the shell companies Viviane used. They discovered that the headquarters of one of these companies was, in fact, an old textile warehouse that Ricardo had inherited from his grandfather and believed to be deactivated. There was the missing physical proof, the causal link between Ricardo's personal assets and the corruption scheme. Viviane had been clever enough to use properties in his name so that, if the scheme were discovered, he would be the first to fall while she played the role of a betrayed and deceived wife. The tension inside the house reached a breaking point when Viviane, sensing that Ricardo was strangely quiet, decided to test him. During dinner, she suggested that they make a large donation to the local police as a thank you for the agility in Elena's case. Ricardo felt his blood boil, but smiled back. "A brilliant idea, my dear. In fact, I would like to review the Foundation's files tomorrow to see where we can pull this resource from without affecting the current projects." Panic flashed in Viviane's eyes for a split second before she regained her composure. "Don't worry about that. I've already handled everything with the accountant. You have more important matters to deal with at the company." It was at that moment that Ricardo had absolute certainty. The accountant was also part of the machinery. The net was tightening, but he needed Viviane to make the final mistake. The fourth mystery arose when Ricardo received an alert on his computer. Viviane had just scheduled a one-way trip abroad for the end of that week. She was planning an escape, taking with her what remained in the Foundation's vaults. He realized he no longer had days, but only hours. He needed to get Elena out of prison legally and ensure that she had in her hands the final proof, the audio recording she had mentioned making on the day of her dismissal. Yes, Elena had been smart. She had not only seen the documents, she had left her phone recording hidden while cleaning Viviane's office, capturing an incriminating conversation between her employer and Dr. L. Ricardo needed to get to that phone before Viviane's henchmen, who were now watching Elena's house, found it. The early morning was filled with calculated movements. Ricardo left the house without making a sound, leaving his phone in the bedroom so that the GPS would indicate he was still sleeping. He met the investigator in a dark alley near the police station. The plan for the climax was set. He did not just want to have Viviane arrested. He wanted her to be exposed in front of all her high society peers at the Foundation's annual gala event that would take place the following night. It would be the perfect stage for justice to be carried out. He felt the weight of responsibility and the fear for Elena, but there was a new strength in his veins. He looked at the horizon, where the first rays of sunlight were beginning to appear, and knew that this would be the last morning in which injustice ruled his house. The board was set, and he was ready for checkmate. The gala night of the Open Heart Foundation shone with cruel irony. The main hall of the most luxurious hotel in the city was decorated with white orchids and amber lights, overflowing with a sophistication that concealed the rot behind the scenes. Viviane moved among the guests, wearing a blue silk dress that would cost 10 years of Elena's salary. She displayed a radiant smile, receiving compliments for her tireless dedication to the underprivileged. Ricardo, at her side, maintained an impeccable posture, although every handshake he gave felt like an act of resistance. He knew that Elena's phone, recovered by his investigator hours earlier from beneath a loose floorboard in the employee's house, contained the silver bullet. More than that, through a silent and highly influential legal maneuver, he had secured Elena's release and official protection for her and her sister. The moment of the great turning point began when Viviane stepped onto the stage for the main speech. She started talking about transparency and love for others, while an institutional video with images of smiling children played on the big screen behind her. That was when Ricardo gave the agreed signal to the sound and image technician. The promotional video suddenly failed, being replaced by a black screen that instantly silenced the hall. Viviane's face froze. Before she could react, an audio began to echo through the high-fidelity speakers. It was her voice, but without the veneer of elegance. The recording that Elena had made captured the exact moment when Viviane ordered Dr. L to divert €2 million to the Luxembourg account, laughing as she said that the poor wouldn't miss what they never had. The shock in the audience was physical. People dropped their glasses, and the murmur of horror grew like a wave. Viviane, pale as marble, tried to scream for them to shut down the system, but the hall lights came fully on, revealing the presence of federal authorities at the exit doors. Ricardo walked calmly to the microphone, taking it from his wife's trembling hands. "The party is over, Viviane," he said, his voice resonating with an authority he had never had before. "Not just this party, but the banquet you made out of other people's misery." At that exact moment, the main doors opened and Elena entered the hall. She was not wearing her cleaning uniform, but a simple and elegant dress. Her posture was upright, her gaze serene, like someone who no longer needed to hide in the shadows. The second major twist happened when Dr. L, whom everyone believed to be an external accomplice, was revealed. Ricardo brought him to the center of the stage under custody. To Viviane's horror, the man was not just a blackmailer. He was an undercover agent of financial intelligence whom Ricardo had secretly hired months earlier, when the first suspicions arose in his mind. Ricardo was not as passive as Viviane believed. He had only been waiting for the moment when she transferred the largest amount so that the crime would be unquestionable and impossible to be reversed by expensive lawyers. Viviane's trap to incriminate Ricardo using his properties failed because he had already transferred the ownership of each of them to the foundation itself weeks earlier, turning her act of corruption into proof of self-sabotage. The moment of intense emotion occurred when Viviane, realizing there was no way out, attempted one last move, humiliating herself at Ricardo's feet and begging for mercy in front of the press cameras. Ricardo looked at her not with hatred, but with deep sadness. He stepped aside and made room for Elena, the woman who had been humiliated, unjustly imprisoned, and threatened now stood before her oppressor. Elena did not utter insults. She simply handed Viviane the gold watch that the police had supposedly found in her house, and which Ricardo had proven had been planted by a bribed officer. "You forgot that dignity is not something that can be taken from someone. It is something carried within. The watch is yours, but your time has come," Elena said. The police moved in and handcuffed Viviane under the frantic flashes of photographers. The woman who had begun the night as the queen of society was leaving it as a common criminal. Ricardo, exhausted but with a cleansed soul, watched his wife being taken away, but his gaze remained on Elena. He realized that justice was not only about punishing the guilty, but about restoring what had been broken in the spirit of those who had been wronged. Ricardo's empire would suffer from the scandal. He knew that. Half of his fortune would be spent covering the losses and compensating the affected families. But for the first time in decades, he felt that every cent he owned was clean. The climax ended with the hall being evacuated, leaving only Ricardo and Elena amid the flowers and luxurious decorations that now seemed empty. They exchanged a look of mutual recognition. Both had lost much, but they had gained something that Viviane's money could never buy: the freedom to look in the mirror without feeling shame. The investigation was over. The guilty were on their way to prison, and the documents that Elena had guarded so carefully would be used to rebuild the foundation from scratch. True justice had been carried out in a complete and relentless way, proving that no secret is big enough to withstand the light of truth when it is carried by those who are not afraid to lose everything to do what is right. The weeks that followed the scandal on the gala night were marked by a profound transformation, not only in the structure of the foundation, but in the soul of every person involved. The mansion, which had once been a monument to Viviane's isolation and coldness, began to breathe a new air. Ricardo did not waste time on regrets. He initiated a rigorous restructuring process, dismissing all the board members who had turned a blind eye to the corruption scheme and bringing in independent external audits. But his greatest act of reparation was personal. He made a point of visiting each of the families whose names were listed in that blue folder Elena had found. He did not send representatives. He went himself, apologizing and ensuring that every scholarship and every medical aid was delivered with interest and moral restitution. Elena, in turn, saw her life change drastically, but she maintained the same essence that had saved her from darkness. With Ricardo's legal help, all the false accusations against her were dismissed, and the bribed officer was duly punished. The moment of intense emotion in this final chapter occurred when Elena took her sister, Lucia, to the best respiratory treatment center in the country. Seeing little Lucia breathing without the aid of heavy equipment, running through the clinic's garden with rosy cheeks, was the greatest reward Elena could receive. She realized that her courage had not only brought down a corrupt structure, but had secured the future of the person she loved most in the world. Elena did not return to the mansion as an employee. She was invited by Ricardo to become the new director of community operations of the foundation. Who better to care for those in need than someone who knew the reality of the streets and possessed unshakable integrity? The relationship between Ricardo and Elena blossomed on a foundation of mutual respect and quiet admiration. It was not a fairy tale romance based on ostentation, but a mature connection between two survivors of a moral storm. They spent hours talking about how to make the world a more just place, sitting in the garden where Elena had once worked in silence. Ricardo learned that his wealth only had value when it served as a tool for change, and Elena discovered that not every man of power is corrupted by it. Their relationship became a symbol that social barriers can be broken when ethical values are shared. The former employee and the millionaire now walk side by side, rebuilding the family legacy on the pillars of truth. Viviane, on the other side of the bars, faced the harsh reality of someone who had built her life on quicksand. Without status, jewelry, or her circle of false friends, she became a shadow of what she once was. Justice was relentless, and she was sentenced to a severe penalty for embezzlement, money laundering, and slander. The moral lesson of this journey is clear and powerful. Power without ethics is a trap that ultimately devours its own owner. The story of Elena and Ricardo teaches us that truth may be silenced for a time, but it has a force of its own that eventually breaks through even the hardest surfaces. The integrity of a simple woman was able to bring down a castle of lies that seemed eternal, proving that courage does not depend on a bank account, but on character. The video ends with a scene of hope. The Open Heart Foundation is reopened in a simple event in a humble neighborhood, surrounded by the people who truly needed it. Ricardo and Elena cut the ribbon together, under the sincere applause of those who now trusted the institution. Ricardo looks at the horizon and feels, for the first time in years, that he can breathe with relief. He is no longer the passive businessman. He is a man who has found his purpose. And Elena, holding her sister's hand, knows that the echo of that shattered crystal at the beginning of it all was, in fact, the sound of the chains of injustice breaking forever. Life gave them a second chance, and they promised to honor it every single day. This story makes us reflect on who we are when no one is watching, and on the importance of listening to the voices that the world insists on ignoring. Often, the solution to our greatest dilemmas comes from where we least expect it, and justice, although sometimes slow, is inevitable for those who persist on the path of good. If you made it this far and were moved by the turning point in Elena and Ricardo's lives, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and to like the video, so that more people can learn about this lesson of overcoming. Tell us here in the comments, what would you do if you were in Elena's place? And don't forget to say which city or country you are watching this video from. Your participation is what drives us to continue bringing narratives that touch the heart. See you in the next story.